So welcome to this presentation titled A Bridge Over Shifting Waters, Engineering Effective and Sustainable Payment Security by Design. So we are in the midst of substantial changes, major shifts in different and at times new challenges. So how do you achieve confidence in your preparedness for the future of payment security? So 2020 will be remembered as a uniquely disruptive year. There are many moving parts and layers of complexity. So when focusing on creating the best solution for a given problem, we may forget that the problem itself might change. As we've seen, our environment changes, both in the way we work, but also the cyber threat landscape, reminding us that payment security success is achieved by design. It requires a solid structure, a sound strategy. So in this presentation, I will review the conclusions of a 12-year study from Verizon on the global payment security trends and how to engineer effective and sustainable payment security by design. How you approach payment security truly makes all the difference in its outcome. So Verizon publishes the Payment Security Report each year, and in October last year, we published the 2020 edition, which is aimed mainly at people and teams tasked with designing and managing compliance strategies and programs. And in that, we published a story about the Choluteca breach in Honduras and the disruptive changes that occurred in 1998. So it's an apt analogy for what we are experiencing today, and we can help to improve our understanding of how should we plan for the future of payment security. So if you're not familiar with the events that happened in the fall of 1998 when the Hurricane Mitch, a Category 5 storm, swept into Choluteca, and Mitch destroyed more than 150 bridges in Honduras, but the Choluteca bridge survived. So the highway on both sides had completely disappeared, and the river shifted course and no longer flowed under the bridge. So shift happens. And does your organization have the skills to build and maintain a solid payment security bridge? And how do you evaluate the strength and the robustness, the resilience and the sustainability of your data security program? When businesses invested in security models based on previous work practices, and how many are compatible with long-term shifts in work from home practices? So last year, we saw an impact on organizations being unable to manage their security logging and monitoring, just as one example. And there was a mass migration to cloud solutions that occurred. And while the processes needed to ensure security of data, that did not receive sufficient attention. So just as the engineers of the Choluteca Bridge succeeded in building a strong bridge, similar to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, they seemingly overlooked the geological study of the surrounding environment, and they did not foresee that the river is able to carve itself a new channel that will bypass the bridge. So to construct a bridge that will withstand storms and major shifts, you need to design it in a way, in terms of data security, that is not the security controls itself. It's not only that needs to be strengthened, but also the control environment that they operate in. It is all about the quality of the planning, the architecture, and engineering, which makes all the difference. So it's the same with data security and compliance program. It's all about the planning and how you forecast the changes. What are the major pillars that your security breach are built on? And you can see it in the Data Security Management Canvas. When we published this Data Security Management Canvas for the first time in the 2020 PSR. And at the top, you see that this security business model followed by strategy. And then you have your current operating and target security operating model, followed by your selection of security frameworks, which are then executed and supported by your security program. So many of the components, such as the security business model and the security operating models, are overlooked by organizations, and they can be major contributors to organizations and the ability to engineer security strategies and programs that are truly effective and robust and resilient. So that's very important. So this management canvas, when followed, will take you all the way across the river from point A to point B. So I'll get back to this later in my presentation. Now let's start off by jumping straight into one of the key findings and the usual top metric of the PCI data security compliance. So only 27.9% of organizations achieved 100% compliance during their interim compliance validation in 2019. So those who read the previous payment security reports from Verizon will know that for the state of compliance section in the report, this metric of full compliance is viewed as the primary metric indicating the level of compliance sustainability. So fewer organizations are demonstrating that they are able to keep all of their PCI controls in place throughout the year. And we know that compliance is validated only once per year for most organizations. And we know that more than half of organizations that receive PCI DSS compliance validation assessments, they struggle with only about 7% of their security controls to keep them in place. So several of those controls fall out of place within weeks after that validation, and they need to be corrected and put back into place. And they usually do it just prior to the next official compliance validation. So all organizations experience controls that fall out of place. So this is important to mention, but it should be very temporary. It must be rapidly detected and corrected. So this is not the case in practice, where controls remain out of place for months before they are being detected and corrected. So in this diagram, you can see that at the bottom of the blue line, the compliance sustainability, that increased steadily from 2012 onwards until 2016, when just over half, was 55.4%, of organizations demonstrated that they keep all of their required controls in place. And then we see the decline down to 27.9%, and you can see the inverse at the top, at the orange line. So the percentage of organizations that failed their interim validation assessments, that decreased, and it's now steadily that's increasing again. So it's important to note that of all the organizations that we have in this study, they completed a validation assessment in prior years. So none of them are new to PCI data security compliance validations, and they therefore should have had the processes in place to support their controls. And almost all of them, as in, I think it's about 90% plus of organizations, they do achieve a passing compliance validation where 100% of the controls are confirmed to be in place during their final formal compliance validation assessment. So the question is, why do organizations struggle with compliance sustainability? Why does it continue to decline with a larger portion of organizations, now more than 2/3, I mean, it's almost 3/4, that do not keep their security controls in place? They know that this is what PCI DSS requires. They shouldn't have partial compliance throughout the year. And it's like flossing the day before you go see your dentist and you neglect it the rest of the year, or you drive with your vehicle that is not roadworthy. I mean, maybe the brakes are shot and you're not really responsible, and you just fix it prior to the day that you go for your annual roadworthy inspection. I mean, that's not responsible. So in terms of payment security, what matters is that of all organizations that experience confirmed payment card data breaches, there's no public record of any organization ever being compliant with PCI DSS at the time of the breach. So the Payment Security Report is the first study that has tracked the state of compliance for breach organizations. So let's move on and look at the overview of the presentation. What I would like to cover is, first I'll start with a bit of background on the Payment Security Report, just to understand how the findings and conclusions were obtained. And then I will review the findings and the state of compliance section, because we need to see how well organizations actually protect their payment card data. And then we include quite a lot of medium and long-term trends. It's the 10-year anniversary of the report. So we included that, and we review the strengths and the weaknesses in compliance. And we also look at why critical control, such as requirement 11, is so challenging for organizations. And then we'll look at why these challenges exist and the methods that organizations apply to successfully overcome them. So it's useful to briefly review the history of the publication. The Verizon Payment Security Report is recognized as the gold standard report in the payment card industry, and it's the only report of its kind. So each year the report builds on the knowledge published before, and it really contains groundbreaking insights and in-depth perspectives on what the challenges are in the industry, and it's very practical, actionable solutions. So 12 years ago, in 2009, we decided to produce a payment security report, and this was only 1 year after Verizon released the first edition of the Data Breach Investigations Report. It was about 4 years after the PCI Security Standards Council released the PCI DSS version 1.1, I believe. Version 1.0 was only a Visa standard. So they released that in December 2004. So in 2009, we started the research on the effectiveness of the PCI data security standard to see how it protects payment card data. And we combined that data from forensics investigations of organizations that experienced a confirmed payment card data compromise. So we then correlated that data with organizations that were assessed against PCI DSS, and we published that first report in 2010. So the purpose of the Payment Security Report is really to examine the payment card data protection and compliance situation across the globe, where we re-examine the strengths and weaknesses across specific industries in each region. And with each edition, we also examine our own understanding, and we re-question what it is that we really know about the state of compliance, the state of data protection, protection, the specific challenges, the underlying causes and effects, and the solutions. So the report is really based on substantial research. We review the latest knowledge on data protection, whether it's contained in books or presentations, conferences, webinars, podcasts, or academic papers. And we use all of those sources of input and we combine it with first-hand data that we collect across the globe from hundreds of organizations that are assessed by qualified security assessors. So during the early editions of the PSR, each time that the data security standard was updated, we looked at how the changes to the requirements actually impacted organizations' ability to meet those requirements. And the changes made to the early versions, we know that it was quite substantial. So the benefit of closely examining PCI security compliance over a period of 12 years is really that we can see clear patterns and trends. We can see what the realities are for organizations that try to protect data, how they go about it, what works, what doesn't work. And we look at the success factors, and there are many organizations that do succeed with their programs to achieve sustainable control effectiveness. They know how to facilitate the design, the implementation, and the management. So there are also many assumptions about payment card security, and those assumptions do not hold up when you closely examine them. So these insights in the report offers really refreshing perspectives on both the problem and the solutions. And with this research that we do in the payment security report, tells us exactly what is needed to succeed both with data security and with compliance. So the latest edition exposed the underlying reasons for ineffective and unsustainable payment card data protection. So the need to really address those leadership and strategy failures. It takes that in-depth look at how organizations can and should take a strategic approach to align their security objectives with the business objectives to secure the investments that you need to maintain sustainable control effectiveness. So back in 2019, in that edition, we looked at the top factors that impact the effectiveness of the sustainability of security programs and how constraints can be pinpointed and diagnosed. That's very important. And that report focused on performance, visibility, control, and maturity, and we analyzed how to realign your compliance program. So in the 2020 edition, we then take the next step. Where should you apply the attention in order to overcome the constraints that are preventing you from achieving sustainable, effective control environment, where you can produce those results in a consistent and predictable manner? So it really goes to the heart of the matter, what the underlying reasons are for the lack of improvement in the sustainability and effectiveness of data protection programs across the payment card industry. So we looked at strategy, business models, operating models, and those are the tools that CISOs need to apply to get the support that they need and the investment that they need to achieve that sustainable, effective control environments. So this report, together with Verizon's other publications, such as the Data Breach Investigations Report, Cyber Espionage, Insider Threat, Mobile Security Index, is quite a number of reports. Also the Incident Response Report, they're all available for download from the website. So let's just briefly look at the report content and the goal of why we do this. The goal of PCI security compliance, when we look at the flagship standard, data security standard fundamentally, it's really just a global uniform baseline security standard with a catalog of security controls to secure payment card data. And we know that the intent is not merely to meet compliance requirements for the sake of compliance, but many organizations focus only on passing an annual compliance validation assessment. So we know that this really hasn't changed over the past 18 years. But the intent of PCI security compliance regulations should be the continuous and effective protection of data, 24/7 security by design. So let's look at the definition that captures the actual intent of PCI security compliance. The goal of PCI security compliance program should be the development and maintenance of a mature data security compliance program rooted in a sound strategy which results in sustainable and effective data security with continuous improvement in a consistent and predictable manner. Now that's really a mouthful. It took me probably 3 years to come up with that one, but it really captures it quite well. So let's step through this quickly. The requirements within PCI DSS does include explicit requirements across the board for numerous requirements, but it does not include the calls for evidence that organizations need to demonstrate ongoing improvement of their control environment towards higher levels of maturity. So this is important to know as well. So organizations that are assessed cannot fail their validation assessment because of low maturity in security and compliance processes and capabilities. And they can still pass their validation assessment even when it's known that the controls lack robustness and resilience needed to remain in place over extended periods of time. So the second goal is that the security program must be rooted in sound strategy. And we've heard this also in various other presentations earlier today. So security success by strategic design. And yet the majority of organizations clearly operate in a tactical reactive mode. Many do not have the documented security strategies which are clearly defined in the focus areas and the objectives and the priorities. So next, the sustainable and effective data security, and this is part of the goal. So compliance for the sake of compliance seldom results in sustainable control effectiveness. And you'll hear I've repeat this phrase quite a lot. So what use is a catalog of baseline security controls, which is essential all the PCI data security standard is, when those controls are not A, demonstrably effective, and B, kept in place, in other words, operated in an environment that supports the sustainability, the longevity, the durability of the control systems within the environment. And then lastly, continuous improvement in a consistent and predictable manner. So we've already said that PCI data security standard does not require evidence of continuous improvement for all of the controls. It does not require that there's evidence of consistency with which the controls are operated. And that means designed, tested, implemented, monitored, maintained, and evaluated. In other words, the security control lifecycle management. That is not an explicit requirement. So very few organizations make use of metrics and maturity models to record the actual performance of their payment security compliance program, and therefore they are unable to predict the performance. They're unable to predict which controls will fall out of place, and they can't really avoid and correct it quickly. And that is part of the reason. So in other words, without these additional steps to go beyond PCI data security standard requirements, organizations are taking shortcuts with their security, and this results in low sustainability and reduced effectiveness. So no publicly available documented case of a confirmed payment card data breach exists for any organization that has maintained their compliance with PCI DSS at the time of the breach. It's only been non-compliant organizations that has been breached, and this challenge has been out there at least since 2010. To have any public record of any organization ever experiencing a confirmed payment card data breach while being compliant. So the differences in PCI compliance and the status of the control of that organizations that do experience a confirmed payment card data compromise, that is known. I mean, we publish it in every edition of the Payment Security Report, and it's also published in other publications. And typically, it's a substantial percentage of controls, so it's even up to 46% of controls are found not in place, and it's across more than 8 out of the 12 key requirements for organizations that experience a confirmed payment card data breach. So while full compliance with PCI data security standard and keeping the required controls in place and rapidly correcting them when they are found to be not in place, that doesn't offer you any guarantee of payment card data security, and there's no recorded evidence of any organization that maintained the baseline security requirements when there are multiple layers of controls that PCI requires, ever experience a confirmed payment card data breach. I mean, if that ever happens, it will be a tremendously interesting case study. So achieving the required level of robustness and resilience of the control environment, which includes your control systems and the individual controls, that is usually, it requires supplementing PCI DSS with one or more additional frameworks, which typically it can be in NIST, cybersecurity framework, the NICE framework, when there are numerous frameworks, and we listed them also in the 2020 PSR. So most organizations acknowledge this need to go above and beyond the requirements. So a note about compliance and control sustainability. If we look at in this slide, you can see this call out that we have on page 9. We said compliance, we need to put the control sustainability in context. So we explained that when we say control environments must be sustainable, we do not mean that the expectation is that not a single control fall out of place ever. That is just not realistic. So as highlighted here, we explained that failures of individual controls at some point are largely inevitable, but they should be brief. Deviation from control standards should be rapidly detected and corrected. So on the top right-hand corner, you can see this. If I click here to explain it in a different way, this pop-up, you can see that there are 4 elements in terms of control sustainability. Organizations need to design, implement, and maintain control environments, and they must be sufficiently robust and resilient. And that robustness means withstanding undesirable changes, and resilience means you need to recover from it. And then to maintain control performance over extended periods where all control systems achieve control objectives without any prolonged disruptions. And then number 4, to rapidly detect and correct any significant deviation of control performance across the environment. So that really captures it. So I quickly want to revisit the main finding and explain that in context of the statistics. So low compliance sustainability, we know it's an industry-wide problem. Many organizations lack the resources and commitment from business leaders to support the data security and compliance programs. So too many companies' data security strategies fail to be aligned with the corporate operations and strategies. And CISOs face constricted budgets. They have limited hiring pool. We know that there's a huge shortage in cybersecurity talent, and they've got a mountain of immediate problems to solve. So this leads to short-term thinking, and they apply technology for quick fixes rather than to develop the strategic plans that with top management, they need long-term solutions. So let's take another look at this slide. When we see the steady multi-year decrease in PCI compliance, only 27.9% of organizations achieved full compliance during the interim assessment. So the security efforts of many organizations are really focused exclusively on deploying and maintaining technologies, and they respond to this continuous stream of alerts. So it's challenging. And if you ask the basic question, are we becoming more secure by improving the sustainability and effectiveness of the control environment? Most organizations are really unable to give a confident answer. So the reality is that the security needs will always exceed the capacity. You don't really encounter organizations that say, well, we've got all the resources that we need to manage cybersecurity, all the people, all the budget, all the time. It's not reality. So you need a more strategic approach. So you've got a much better chance of succeeding at maintaining your PCI security compliance when you have a well-defined security business and operating model that is aligned with the overall business strategy. Now, for such a transformation to succeed, the leadership teams should examine and possibly substantially revise their existing security operating models. So this is a key point as well. When you can ask any executive, are you comfortable to see your CISO or your steering committee request more funding each year to manage your data security program without explaining how the resources that you spent previously are optimized and the value that you've extracted? You must be able to answer that question. And the reality is that compliance sustainability, when we can see that it declined for 3 years in a row since 2017, and the PCI security standard is not new. I mean, it's existed for about 18 years. So the requirements in the data security standard also didn't change significantly since 2015. I'll show you another slide on that soon. So organizations allow security controls to fall out of place, and they are merely applying temporary fixes that will just last long enough to pass the next annual validation assessment. So we can ask questions, are CISOs doing all they can with what they have? Or why do we see the same controls that needs to be fixed year after year? And clearly there's a leadership issue and a lack of strategy, design, and execution to prioritize the right objectives. So as I mentioned before, this drop in full compliance is not because organizations are experiencing challenges in the requirements that changed. In the 2020 PSR, we've published this graph for the first time. It's there at the compliance calendar section. So what you can see is that there are still only 79 controls with 252 requirements. The number of test procedures even reduced a bit. So we know that the number of controls do not determine the complexity of the work involved, but this does give you a high-level indication that the problem is not that organizations are struggling to interpret any new requirements. It is the lack of process maturity, the lack of strategic design, which causes compliance to go down. It's not the changes in the requirements. So the PCI security, as I said, the requirements hasn't changed a lot in the last 5 years. The standard is considered stable. And it's the architecture in the design of the control environment. It's the control systems, the individual controls, documentation, the processes, the people, and the IT that needs to be taken care of. So in the upcoming release, I mean, we're already busy writing the 2021 version of the payment security report, and we will look at the critical decisions, process engineering, and the communication and culture aspects, which are so important as well. So a quick recap, just before I go into some of the other findings, the main metrics, full compliance, that is the percentage of organizations that when they were assessed during the interim assessment achieved 100% compliance. So obviously high is good and low is bad. The control gap is the indication of how far the organizations missed the mark. So this is an average figure, and it gives you the measure of how far the assessed companies were from full compliance. So obviously a lower gap is better. And then the third metric is for compensating controls. So it's not an issue of the higher number of compensating controls that are used are worse for compliance. It's just really compensating controls increase your workload. So this is the percentage of organizations that used one or more compensating controls for any of the key requirements. So it's not the percentage of PCI controls from the total population of controls that were compensated. So just with this reminder done, let's go to the statistics and see how well the industry's performed. So in the central portion of the report, you can see that the state of compliance section, we have about 52 pages of in-depth analysis. And this is really the most in-depth analysis that we've ever done in this 2020 edition. So you can see the PCI requirements within each geographic region and also for the 4 key industry verticals: financial services, retail, hospitality, and IT services. So as we just reviewed, we measure compliance in those 3 metrics: full compliance, control gap, and compensating controls. And you can see in the vertical blue bars, the full compliance being the lowest for the retail industry. Only 16.7% of retailers worldwide achieved the required 100% compliance. And financial services, hospitality industries, they didn't fare much better, 28%. IT services, they usually outperform the other industries, 40%. So the orange bars show you the control gap, the percentage of controls that were not in place during the interim assessment. So you can also see that they don't really fail by much. But the controls that are found not in place, they are really critical security controls. They are essential to prevent data compromises. So as I've said before, about 90+% of organizations in the data set, they do go on to achieve 100% compliance after they fix these security controls. But that's not the intent of the PCI security standard. You shouldn't wait for the external security assessor or for your ISA to arrive and point out the controls and say, hey, this needs to be fixed. That should be built into the process. Now, if we look at the 5-year trends, this is we included these trends because it's the 10th anniversary edition, and you can see the 12 key requirements here of the data security standard and how each of the key requirements have changed over the past 5 years. So these are percentages. They indicate the total percentage of organizations across the globe that had all of their PCI DSS controls in place during their interim validation for each of the particular key requirements. So the length of the bar is the sum of the full compliance percentage for each year, from 2015 in the blue on the left to 2019 on the orange on the right-hand side. So the longer the horizontal bar is, the higher the percentage of organizations that had all of the controls in place under each of these 12 key requirements. So shorter bars obviously then indicate fewer organizations maintained that key requirement. So it's very clear which requirements and which controls are weak performance. It's requirements 11, 12, 6, and 10. They have the lowest sustainability. And in fact, there's absolute consistencies in some of the controls, such as requirement 11, security testing, which remains the least compliant key control. It's 10 years in a row. And there's also a clear correlation between requirements 11 and 6. You can see it there with network and application vulnerability management and penetration testing. And then also with systems that need to be hardened, that with requirement 6. So requirements 5 and 7, they achieved a much higher level of sustainability for most organizations. And next we can go into a bit of detail to see how organizations did with the specific industries. So on the 12 key requirements, you can see that requirement 11, security testing, has the lowest full compliance. And since this is the 10th anniversary edition of our report, we included these long-term diagrams. You can see the chart on the left plots how each of the key requirements performed since 2010. And you can see at the bottom of that spaghetti chart, requirement 11, it's the lowest compliance every single year. So this is due to a lack of process maturity. It's not a failure of technology, and you can follow how the compliance of each of the key requirements changes over the past 10 years. For example, if you look there at requirement 3, it changed a lot, starting from position 3 at the bottom in 2010 and in 2019 ending up number 5. So compliance with requirement 11 is going down even further. At the center diagram, you can see how it degraded over the past 3 years in terms of full compliance. And on the far right, you can see how the control gap increased, with organizations struggling with even more controls under this requirement. So this clearly is not good at all. And we know exactly where the trouble is. It's controls 11.2 and 11.3, network and application security testing and penetration testing. So this issue, it's not that organizations do not perform testing. They are required to conduct network scans and identify the critical and high vulnerabilities to fix them and to scan them again to confirm. But they forget to do this, and they do not have the processes in place to get this done in time. And it's the same with penetration testing. So they need to do these tests not just once a year as well. We need to remember that they also when you make significant changes to your network, and organizations forget to do that. So again, it's a lack of process capability for consistent, repeatable control performance. So organizations need to develop the process and capability maturity, but they don't have the sufficient direct incentives to do so for compliance purposes. And this may change a bit with the release of version 4.0. Now here you can see the 3-year trends on requirement 11, and it's really bad globally. And fewer organizations are keeping security testing in place. It degraded quite badly in the Americas, and that's mainly North America, but also Canada and organizations in Mexico. The control gap, you can see there as well in the middle, it increased globally. 13.2% gap on controls not in place for this critical key requirement. Now then, if we look at the industry level as well, financial services are having increased issues with security testing, retail especially, and this is not good, especially in terms of COVID-19. We see that a lot of the small and medium-sized retailers were really badly hit, and they may have to reduce their security budgets even further. We know that the larger retailers did quite well during the COVID-19 pandemic, but the control gap even increases for IT services organizations. So in the 2020 report, we're really going to detail what the underlying issues are. Why do organizations struggle so much with security testing? Now, considering the study from April in last year, 2020, indicating that the average security operations team receives over 11,000 alerts per day, and the vast majority must be manually processed. I mean, this is not a recipe for success if you do not have a clear strategy and a process in place to deal with it. So there's been substantial advancements in logging and monitoring solutions over the past 2 decades, but yet today, less than half of organizations, only 47%, say that they can address most or all of their security alerts received in a day. And nearly 20% of alerts are manually reviewed or triaged by an analyst, and almost a third are false positives. So 28% are outright ignored by analysts struggling to keep up with the workload, and only 70% of alerts are touched by automation. So security teams need to rely on an average of 10 different categories of security tools when they try to manage these alerts. So there are common operational issues associated with Control 11.2. As I said, organizations should not, but they do forget that it's required to rescan and to verify that the high-risk vulnerabilities, as defined in Control 6.1, are remediated. So the vulnerability data that is typically quite difficult to consume due to the volume and the need to verify all these false positives. And then we see that organizations are delaying this until the month before the passing vulnerability scan is due. And then they may have changes in staff responsibilities, this lack of oversight, and organizations, they need to improve their overall security governance. So all of this contribute to the weaknesses in the underlying environment. And then also you have end-of-life technologies such as Windows 2007, Windows Server 2008. We see that too in the field, and that creates issues too where organizations need to assess these devices and they have no further support. So all kinds of complexities. Now, if you look at this 2019 study on the security maturity by Orange Cyber Defense, they found that in most organizations, core security processes are absent or lacks maturity. And here you can see that more than half of organizations do not have process vulnerability management or penetration testing programs in place. So only 3% of organizations document these very important processes, and only 5% regularly review it. So if we look at the global trends on compliance, we have an in-depth analysis on the compliance performance per industry vertical in the report. And I will quickly go through the state of compliance section levels just for each of the 4 verticals. I won't spend too much on it, but just on financial services, hospitality, IT, and retail, just so that you can see pretty much, for example, financial services organizations, they struggled with requirement 11, security testing. There's no surprise there. But I mean, it's only 4.1% of financial services organizations in the Americas, which are the most of the data is from the United States, achieved 100% compliance on PCI DSS during their interim assessment. And financial services need to improve requirements 11, 12, 6, and 10. Now, if you look at the control gap between 2018 and 19, the control gap increased for 11 of the 12 key requirements, and it's only requirement 4 that improved. And requirement 11 is still the highest control gap. So I'm not going to go too much into these statistics. You'll see it's very similar. Same with hospitality. Well, we've got a bit of an outlier there, requirement 2. They struggle with that, but then again, it's also requirement 11. And you can see that a lot of improvements there. So I'll just quickly skim through it. Requirement 11, IT services. They struggle with the control gap with requirement 11, 7, and 5. Retail, again, requirement 11 and 12. Control gap, again, requirement 11. So we can see a lot of consistency there as well. So let's go to the perspective and the challenges and the solutions. So we've covered the compliance challenges in detail. And if we just look at the models, how do you solve these challenges? How do you construct a bridge, one that will withstand this category 5 storms? And you still need to be functional. So the solutions are known. It requires an engineering mindset. Success can only be achieved when you apply the correct architecture design for the construction and the maintenance of your security compliance strategy and the program. So every year we publish these numerous practical models that prove to be highly successful. I'm just listing 10 examples here. And these models are explained in the 2018, 2019, and 2020 editions of the Payment Security Reports, how you really bring everything together. So I'll quickly look at some of them. So this is the data security canvas. We call it the data security management canvas, and it was the first time that we published it in the 2020 report. So it starts with the security business model, and it's followed by security strategy, the security operating model and target operating model. And then you have your selection of security frameworks, followed by your security program with its associated projects. So it's important to keep these elements on this canvas in the proper sequence. Otherwise, the benefit that you will receive from structuring your overall security and compliance operations may be worth less. So when you operate your security operations in this order, it presents a much better flow and understanding of the information issues, and it removes the blind spots that we see. So I'll get back to this a bit later as well, but if we look at some notable quotations, the significance of this data security management canvas, as we've explained it in the research report, if you look at this quotation, unless the security and compliance strategy, the business models and operating models are improved, it's mostly symptoms that are addressed, and we see this over and over again in the field. So security strategy is seldom effective without support from a security business model and security operating model. And CISOs need to get better at defining the business model to explain to the board how data security and compliance generate value for the organization. And this helps to secure the needed investments and the resources that you need for long-term sustainability. So it is also the other quotation that you see here, security business model is that what really ties everything together, all the elements, and it helps you to obtain the support for your security strategy. And we often, when we go across the field, you do not see really well-crafted business security models. Also, you can see that many CISOs are managing risk only in parts, but not all of the organization, because they don't have full visibility into the enterprise landscape. And this is also for that reason that this model is so important. You need to have clarity about your strategy and your constraints. So most organizations lack the diagnostic proficiency to pinpoint the precise constraints that hamper the design, the implementation, and the management of their security programs. And it really requires a very systematic management of the underlying structures. Now, if you look at the operating model for security, just briefly, this is why we emphasize it. It's one of the cornerstones of the bridge that you need to build. And you need this level of visual representation to diagnose what is causing the performance problems. So I'm not going to spend too much details there, but when we list it into quite a lot of detail, if you wonder what the many elements of the security operating model is that you may be missing in your organization, you can see it here. You need to maintain this documented representation of your security operating model and also your target future security operating model to know which elements you need to improve. So then we also have the top 7 strategic data security management traps. So the Payment Security Report really digs deep into the challenges that the CISOs face and how they can contribute to the breakdown of compliance. So we describe these 7 traps. So for organizations to truly focus on improving the effectiveness and sustainability of the data security, they need to avoid these 7 traps. And if we briefly look at them, strategy and governance, it's failing at the leadership level. CISOs struggle to secure strategic support from the executive leadership. There's obviously resource issues, but that's not the main concern. And resource issues is often listed as the first issue, but it's not. So we know that there's a substantial contributing factor is this tremendous shortage in cybersecurity skills. But then strategy design issues, mainly prioritizing the wrong objectives. That's what we see. Next, security strategy execution, not following through, low process and capability maturity, and then lastly, communication and culture constraints. So we explain this also I'm not going to cover this in detail, but we go into quite a bit of detail in the report to explain to you exactly. You can see here the building blocks of your bridge. This is how you design the architecture and engineering of your program to be robust and resilient. So you can see here at the bottom the constraints that you need to deal with, and on the left, the security management canvas that you need to go through. And it's the same for each one. The traps clearly, I'll quickly scroll through this in detail, how organizations can truly achieve success with their payment security programs if they take a more strategic approach. And we deal with each one of these in quite a bit of detail. So let's quickly recap. So at this stage, you may, I know that this is quite a bit of information overload. It's a lot to digest. And as I wrote in the opening paragraph of the 2020 PSR in the executive summary, security is certainly complex, but it does not need to be complicated. It is complex because it consists of many different parts, but it is only complicated when you are unable to distinguish the parts and the relationships to each other. And what I've presented here as well really helps you to uncover these underlying reasons and to distinguish between it. So if we recap very quickly, as I presented, the payment security industry is really suffering from low maturity and unpredictable control performance. Critical security controls are not maintained. Controls fall out of place within weeks after validation without timely detection and correction. Controls need to be designed and engineered to be sufficiently robust and resilient. And if you do not do that, you have this knock-on effect where a failure of one control impacts a series of other controls. So a weak control results in a weak control system. And weaknesses in any control systems weakens the control environment. And a weak control environment exposes your organization to an increased likelihood of a data compromise. Now, if we look at why sustainability is so low, just to recap, low sustainability in compliance is a problem that exists in the inception of the regulation over the past 17 or 18 years. We know that it's not a new problem. So this is certainly mainly due to a lack of leadership, setting the right objectives, priorities, and focus. And this must be done across the management canvas, your security business model, your strategy, your operating model, your frameworks, and your program. And this is due to also many organizations oversimplifying their security design and execution approaches. And then lastly, an inability to gain business support to secure investments needed to do what is necessary to achieve that sustainable security control effectiveness. So quickly on the next steps, it's in addition to these 7 data security management traps, you should not neglect the 7 fundamental data security principles either. And we've listed these several times before. So we've advocated these principles in numerous years. Success is achieved by design, not by luck. All controls must be effective, not just present. Controls have dependencies and function in control systems. They do not function just in isolation. So for controls to be sustainable, their control environment must also be sustainable. And then at number 4, operating performance indicators should be measured and reported. So let's just stand still there for 1 second. You need to go beyond measurement of compliance performance, which mainly looks at the list of baseline security controls that must be kept in place. But you should also measure your operating and the operating of your controls and the operating environment itself, which this means the processes, the tasks, the supporting documentation, the responsibilities, etc. So when all of that influence the sustainability and effectiveness with which the controls are operated and maintained. And then at number 5, the input, activity, and output of all core processes must be consistent and predictable to support timely detection, prevention, and correction of the performance deviations. And this is very essential to achieve sustainability. And then at number 6, continuous improvement must be made towards adequate process and capability maturity. So hopefully we will see this as well in the upcoming version 4, but we will only see those results in about the year 2023 at the earliest. And then lastly, making data security inputs, processes, and outcomes predictable. You need to simplify first. This must be your default, and it requires hard work, but it's really worth it. And then clarify the concepts, the approach, the problem, and the solution. And then you can achieve the control over the processes, the inputs, and the outputs. Then you can work towards improving quality, which means really repeatability and consistency. And this will lead you toward predictable outcomes, no surprises, true management and control. So this concludes my presentation. And then just as a parting thought, people have adopted new ways of doing things and they have different security needs. We know that. And there are thousands of organizations that not only succeed with their data security and compliance, but they really thrive, and we can learn from them the methods that they apply to keep their security and compliance breach intact. And they thrive despite these sweeping changes to both the risk and the security compliance landscape. So my hope with this presentation is that I provided some insights on how organizations are engineering effective and sustainable payment security by design. And I hope that it has in some ways also changed the way in which you view the future of your payment security strategy and program. Thank you.